everyone! Today we are going to be talking about eggplant. No saucy comments, please. Eggplant is one of the most versatile ingredients because it plays so well with other flavors. It's pretty mild and the texture can range from being pretty firm to being really very soft. So there are lots of different ways to work with eggplant. Today what I like to do is make one of my favorite recipes for eggplant, which is moussaka. Now I know a lot of people pronounce it moussaka. I think it's a little bit more fun to say moussaka, but I believe the Greeks pronounce it moussaka. So that's the way I'm going to say it, but no judgment. Before I get started on the recipe for this video, let's talk a little bit about growing eggplant. I've been growing my Black Beauty eggplant in a raised bed. I planted these out in May once the soil temperatures got to about 65 degrees, but I started the seeds in April just to get a head start on the season, which is always a great thing to do for eggplant because it is a little bit slow to get to maturity and it really needs a warm temperature. So this is a great example of a plant you want to start indoors ahead of time. Once they're established in the ground, they're really easy to take care of. They don't need a lot of special care. I do recommend staking them up because the branches can get large and floppy and kind of heavy, and if you don't stake them up, they do have a tendency to flop over and potentially break. So you do want to stake them, but other than that, they are super low maintenance. One really great thing about eggplant is its productivity. These plants have been producing 3 to 4 individual eggplants probably every 3 weeks or so since June. So that's production through June, July, August, September, October. So 5 months of production is what I expect from these plants, and I think that is a really efficient use of space. Another thing I like about eggplant is that you can harvest the fruits at any point. So even as baby plants, they are delicious. And you just want to make sure you harvest them before they get fully mature, where the seeds get hard and unpleasant to eat. All right, let's get started on the recipe. The first thing I am going to do after washing this is take off and trim the tops, and then I'm going to slice it into about 1/2 inch thick slices. The next step with this eggplant is to toss it in a bit of salt, and then we're going to let it sit for about 15 minutes. Most of the time you salt things to draw out bitter liquids. I don't expect this to be bitter because it's so young, but I am still going to salt it just to draw out excess liquid. While the salt is doing its magic on the eggplant slices, I'll move on to the next step, which is slicing potatoes. And we're going to slice these potatoes thinner than the eggplant slices. I'd say about 1/4 inch thick. I prefer to use Yukon Gold for this, but really any thin-skinned potato would work well. What you want to avoid is like an Idaho russet, for example, because the skin is less pleasant to eat, and you certainly could, if that's all you have, I would just peel it because you don't want to have thick skin in the middle of the dish. But these have such a nice thin skin, you really won't notice them, and I'm all about skipping a step like peeling a potato. I've seasoned these potato slices with salt and pepper and tossed them in some olive oil and kind of spread them out as thin as I could. And the next step is I'm going to pop them in the oven that is at 350 degrees. The eggplant is done sort of sitting in the salt, and you can see the dark liquid that comes out of it. Some of this drained into the sink already, so this isn't all of it, but this is essentially what you want, that the liquid inside the eggplant gets pulled out by the salt. You can rinse this after salting to make sure you have the excess salt taken off of it, but I find that it's not necessary. I'm not using a ton of salt when I do this. I'm really just sprinkling it quite lightly. So the next step is I am just spreading this out on my baking sheet, and I will toss them in olive oil and then pop them in the oven along with the potatoes. While the veggies are cooking off in the oven, I have started to just saute a bit of garlic and onion, and we're going to sweat these until they're translucent. So I have these going now in some olive oil, and I'm going to add some spices to that. I'm going to add a stick of cinnamon
and a little sprig of oregano. And I'm just going to whip this with my hand. Oh, it already smells great. And to that, we should just give a little bit of salt and pepper because we want to season as we go. And we want to be cautious about the salt because, as we remember, we salted the eggplant, so that's going to be pretty salty. So we don't want to overdo it on the salt. We want to be cautious and conservative about that. What I will do when we pull the eggplant out of the oven is taste that for salt. So if it feels quite salty, that will be it for the salt I add to the dish. If it doesn't feel so salty, I might add a little bit more. So it's really important to taste as you go along. I'm going to keep cooking this for a few minutes until the onions get translucent. And then I am going to add some ground lamb and brown it up. The lamb is almost done browning, and at this point what I'm going to do is take a whole bunch of tomatoes from the garden and zap these up in a blender. Now typically recipes often call for sort of canned crushed tomatoes and tomato paste. These are San Marzanos from my garden and they are really intensely flavored, so I don't bother with the tomato paste. I find that just taking a bunch of these has an intense enough tomato flavor to work. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, I've zapped up my tomatoes and you can see they are incredibly thick. I mean, I am holding this like completely sideways and it's not moving. I think one of the reasons why it might be so thick is that I do not separate the skins out. And so that definitely adds to kind of the thickness of this tomato puree, but it's pretty wild how thick that was. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mix this in now that the lamb is brown. And I am going to pop in 2 bay leaves into that, and we will let this simmer for a while. And if I find that it's getting too dry, I might add some more tomato puree. Honestly, I probably will, just because I have so many tomatoes sitting on my counter and I really need to do something with that. And what you want to do is cook it down until it gets nice and concentrated and that sort of raw tomato taste comes out of it, which shouldn't take too long, probably about 15 minutes. This isn't like a slow cooked, long cooked kind of sauce. While the meat sauce simmers away, I am going to get started on a roux. So this is 4 tablespoons of butter and 4 tablespoons of flour. And I've just cooked this down a little bit, really just to cook the raw flour taste out of that flour. And to that, I'm going to go ahead and add 2.5 cups of milk. You could be really cautious about this and do this very slowly to make sure you don't have lumps. But I find that if you just throw it in and stir really vigorously, the lumps sort of work out. So I'm just going whole hog, 2.5 cups of milk. And as you can see, I'm not being super precise about these measurements. So all the milk has been incorporated and I am whisking it continuously to make sure it doesn't scorch on the bottom. And what we're looking for is for that roux to activate, and when that happens, this will thicken up quite significantly. In the meantime, I will pop in some seasonings, which include nutmeg, just a dash, not too much, and a little bit of white pepper, just a little bit, as well as a little bit of salt. Okay, the bechamel has thickened up beautifully. It is not lumpy at all, despite me just pouring that milk right in there. And what I'm going to do now is I've cut the heat, and I'm going to add some Parmesan cheese. Let's just whisk this to incorporate the cheese first. And then we're going to move pretty quickly and crack an egg in here and stir, 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 very, very quickly. And you want to make sure to do this off the heat again, because you do not want to scramble the egg. And if you do this vigorously enough, you should be fine. You could definitely be a lot more cautious. You could, if you're nervous about it, pull out a bit of this main sauce into a small bowl, add the egg into it, and then put it back in to just ease it into the hot temperature. But I find that it's okay if you just move quickly and you just get it incorporated very quickly off the heat, you should be fine.
Okay, let's check in on our sauce. So this has been simmering away for probably about half an hour, and it's looking nice and tight. What we don't want to see is a watery or loose sauce. Now let's assemble all of the components to put together in our lasagna dish. Okay, now we have all our components and we can begin assembling our moussaka. I started by putting just a little bit of sauce on the bottom of this casserole dish, and I'm going to start by layering some eggplant in here in a nice single layer. After that, I'm going to shingle on some potatoes. Here is my layer of potatoes, and now I'm going to top that with some sauce. You don't want these making it into your final dish, so make sure to fish out your cinnamon and your bay leaves. Now it's time for the next layer, so we're going to start with our eggplant again. So your goal now is to use the rest of your eggplant. I am so happy I managed to nail that. The next step is to add the rest of the potatoes. If you're trying to avoid extra carbs in your diet, you can skip the potatoes. That is so satisfying, like another pretty perfect fit. So I've used all the eggplant and my potatoes, and now let's add the rest of this sauce. It's the little things that are so satisfying when you have a perfect fit and a perfect amount. I love it when the recipe just works like that. Now it's time to add the bechamel, and when you leave it for a bit, it will develop a skin, and that's okay. Just give it another stir and it will sort of dissipate. It might be a teeny bit lumpy, but it'll sort of work itself out once it gets in the oven. So we're just going to pour this gently and try to get this somewhat evenly over the top of this whole thing. Put every last bit of goodness out of this pot. Okay, now we have the bechamel poured out on top. I'm just going to take a spoon and smooth it out over the top. And you want to be careful to try to do your best that the sauce doesn't sort of peek through, because you want to have that nice, clean, white top. And but you know, it's okay. Again, it's home cooking, not restaurant cooking. It's not the end of the world if you get a little bit of your red sauce peeking through. Yum. We've got everything covered now. I'm just going to take a wet paper towel and clean off the edges so they don't burn. All right, let's get this into the oven. We're gonna bake the moussaka in the oven at 350 for about a half hour, and then we're gonna let it stand for an excruciating 10 more minutes before we cut into it. The moussaka is now out of the oven and it has rested for a bit, and that resting period is important because when you first pull it out of the oven, it's kind of liquidy and you want to give it some time for the ingredients to sort of absorb that liquid back a little bit. So this resting period is really important. The first piece is always the hardest to get out. Okay, oh perfect, that wasn't so bad. Get the plate. Yay, success! Now let's give this a try. Oh, this smells so delicious. I can already smell the cinnamon that was in the sauce. It adds such a wonderful fragrance. Before you even take it out, you can get that amazing scent in here. Of everything in this bite, it's gonna be big and messy, but let's try. Oh, this is so good. So hearty and rich. The potato is so comforting, and it just adds those like starchy bits of love. The texture is great. It's not too mushy. And what's nice is you have a little bit of a contrast of texture where the eggplant is very soft. The potato is quite dense. So you have that creamy, delicious bechamel. So it's nice to have that range of textures along with the various flavors, because it doesn't just turn into one big pile of mush. Thanks for coming along with me on my little moussaka journey. If there are any eggplant dishes that you love, please do share them in the comments. I'm always looking for new things to try, and especially if they help me enjoy a vegetable I don't always love. So please do share those recipes with me. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. need, certain kinds of fertilizer, typical amount of, water. They're not particularly thirsty. They're not particularly hungry for nutrition.